Hello friends. Welcome to the Phoenix What If. How are you all? So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was wielder of the Crimson Princess and fell in love with Yoruichi Shihouin. But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, if possible, share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. It was a quiet night in Konohagakure. The wind was blowing peacefully while the leaves would dance in the cooling breeze as they fell off the trees. However, in the darkness of the forest, a lone child sat on the grass in front of an old shack. Okay, what's the first jutsu in this scroll? Shadow clone? Oh man, clones are my worst jutsu, asked a certain blonde-haired child. The said child was a boy by the name of Uzumaki Naruto, and at the moment he was reading a scroll. Not just any ordinary scroll, mind you, but the village's most forbidden scroll. You see, the child had just failed his academy exam and was depressed. In desperation of becoming a ninja, he listened to a corrupt teacher by the name of Mizuki who had tricked the boy into stealing the said scroll. Now the boy had done his job successfully. He felt as though he should get started before his sensei arrived. At any rate, Naruto quickly began to read through the scroll, searching for something to impress his teacher with when he showed up. Damn, these look hard. I guess I'll just start with the shadow clone jutsu, it looks like the easiest, Naruto said as he went to work on learning the shadow clone. After half an hour, Naruto heard an all-familiar voice ring out in the forest. Found you. Looking up from the scroll, Naruto saw it was Iruka Amino. Hee, you found me quicker than I thought, Iruka-sensei. I only had enough time to learn a single jutsu from the scroll, but that's still enough to pass, right? Stated the grinning blonde while he rubbed the back of his head. Pass? What are you talking about, Naruto? Asked the scarred instructor as he looked his student over. He's covered in sweat and he looks exhausted. Could he have really been just training? Thought Iruka. Come on, Iruka-sensei, stop fooling around. I stole the scroll and learned a jutsu, so I get to graduate, Naruto said enthusiastically. Iruka was dumbfounded to say the least. Naruto actually believed that he would graduate. Naruto, who told you that? Iruka asked the excited blonde. Naruto looked at him with a confused expression and replied. Mizuki-sensei. Why? Suddenly Naruto found himself knocked sideways by a tackle from Iruka. Before he could say anything, the blonde noticed the tree he was standing in front of mere seconds ago was now riddled with kunai. He also saw that Iruka was covered in a number of cuts. Shit, I missed, stated a snide voice from overhead. Looking up Naruto, Mizuki, turning a now grinning face to Naruto, he said happily. Congratulations, Naruto, you passed, now hand over the scroll. Naruto then heard Iruka shout. Naruto, don't. Mizuki tricked you. That scroll contains some of the village's most dangerous and forbidden jutsu. You can't let him take it. Mizuki scowled at Iruka for a moment before a twisted idea sprung up in his evil little mind. Naruto, would you like to know a secret? What kind of secret? Naruto asked, very confused. Mizuki, don't. It's forbidden, shouted Iruka, understanding what Mizuki was planning. The secret behind why everyone hates and ignores you. The reason you will never be accepted in this village, stated Mizuki with a twisted grin. Noting he had the whisker-faced boy's complete attention, he began to secretly unsheath one of the giant shuriken from across his back, keeping the movements slow and hidden. You remember the story about how the Kyuubi attacked 16 years ago and was killed by the fourth? At Naruto's nod, Mizuki continued. Well, that was a lie. The fourth couldn't kill the demon, so he imprisoned it inside a newborn infant. Iruka shouted again for Mizuki to stop, but he was ignored. That infant was you. You are the nine-tailed fox. Now die, demon brat, shouted Mizuki as he let his giant shuriken fly at the boy. Naruto didn't even notice the weapon flying straight at him. His mind was filled with thoughts of confusion and betrayal. Before Naruto could realize he was in danger, he felt a pair of arms wrap around him. It was Iruka, with a giant shuriken in his back. Naruto looked at his teacher, eyes filled with tears and a gaze that was asking, why? He's wrong, Naruto. You aren't the Kyuubi. You are the most caring boy I have ever met. You train yourself with all your might and you might screw up at times, but you never give up, Iruka said as Naruto began to really cry. Mizuki was becoming disgusted with this display and said as he slowly walked toward his victims. This sentimental downpour is killing me, so I'll be killing you now, Iruka. This caused Naruto to snap his head towards the man and thought. He's gonna kill both of us, and I can't do anything. Naruto. Run. Iruka ordered Naruto as he barely stood before the trader and the boy. Naruto ran into the forest, not sure where he was going. Then suddenly, Naruto felt something appear in his hand. He looked down and saw a simple-looking katana with a red hilt in his hand. Do you truly wish to live and save your sensei? A voice rang out in Naruto's mind. It sounded fairly gentle and was definitely female. Naruto was unsure of where the voice was coming from, but softly replied. Yes. The voice replied, do you wish to be strong and protect those around you? Even if doing so means you may die? Naruto replied in a more forceful voice. Yes. The voice then said, in that case you must learn my name. For yours and your sensei's sake I hope you can hear it. My name is. Mizuki was slowly closing in, taking pleasure in prolonging his victim's pain. First you, then the demon, Mizuki said as he reached for his other gigantic shuriken. Suddenly a voice roared. Scream, Benihime, and a wave of red energy collided with Mizuki, sending him flying into a tree. Mizuki got up and saw Naruto standing in front of Iruka, and in his hand was a sleek medium-sized sword. It had a crimson tassel dangles on the end of the hilt, which had a gentle decorative bend. Instead of a crossguard, a U-shaped decoration covers the first 3 or 4 inches of blade, with a flower petal design right as it meets the string crossguard. It also had a red decorative string wrapped thrice around the hilt, with a 3-loop bow on one side and a folded paper decoration on the other. The blade was straight and slim, though somewhat short, with a single edge along the bottom and a rounded top. The tip ended in a slanted razor-like edge instead of being tapered to a point. You come near my sensei like that again, and I'll kill you, Naruto threatened as he stared daggers at the traitor before him. Yeah, right. Let's put that to the test, demon, Mizuki said as he threw his gigantic shuriken at the blonde. Naruto simply stood in place and held up his sword as he said. Scream, Benihime. And a large shield of red energy appeared and stopped the shuriken dead in its tracks. Naruto yelled again as he swung his sword at the gray-haired traitor. Razor, Benihime. And a wave of red came from the blade and headed straight for the traitor. Mizuki leapt out of the way, only for the attack to change directions and slice him in half. Iruka was in total shock at Naruto's power, but quickly recovered and said, Naruto, come here. Naruto went over to his sensei and knelt down next to him. Close your eyes. Iruka said softly. Naruto did as he was told, then felt something on his forehead. Naruto opened his eyes and saw that Iruka wasn't wearing his headband. Naruto felt his forehead and knew he was wearing his sensei's headband. You graduate, Iruka said before he passed out. Just then the Hokage appeared with several Anbu and saw the bloody mess that was Mizuki on the ground with Naruto and Iruka not far away. Lord Hokage, I can explain, Iruka said as he felt a twinge of pain. The old man shook his head and replied. No need, I saw it all, and I also saw that Naruto has unlocked a Zanpakuto. Naruto looked at the old man and said in a confused tone. A what? The Hokage went on to explain what a Zanpakuto was. A Zanpakuto is unique as the swords are both reflections of a person's soul and power, and sentient beings unto themselves. The Zanpakuto's name is also the name of the living spirit that empowers the sword and lends its strength to the person who wields it. These beings can vary greatly in appearance and have their own distinct personalities which match their owners. Normally, the Zanpakuto spirit can only be seen by its wielder. Otherwise, they dwell in their own inner world, created within the minds of the person who wields them. As such, each person's inner world is drastically different from another person's and is unique to themselves. Naruto was amazed at the power he now had, but before he could say anything else he was pulled into his mind. Where am I? Naruto said as he looked around the sewer-like area. It's your inner world, a woman's voice said. Naruto looked behind him and saw a woman with long red hair and red eyes, who wore a black kimono with a red sash. She was very beautiful, but what really got Naruto's attention was the 9 red foxtails behind her. You're the Kyuubi, Naruto yelled at the top of his lungs. The woman simply replied. Only in title. My name, as you now know, is Benihime. Naruto eyed the woman before him and said, "Well, you did help me, but why did you attack the village?" Benihime looked away as she said, "I'm afraid I cannot recall. When I became a Zanpakuto, many of my memories were lost, but I do know that a one-eyed Uchiha made me very angry." Naruto nodded his head, sensing no lie in her voice. "Why did you bring me here?" Naruto asked. Benihime replied, "I felt it was wise for you to know what I once was, and also to tell you that you need to wear less orange." Naruto then yelled back at her, "What do you mean? This is my favorite color." The Zanpakuto pinched the bridge of her nose in annoyance and replied, "My favorite color is red, but as you can see I don't cover myself in nothing but red." Naruto was about to argue once again before Benihime continued, "I am merely saying that wearing less orange will result in people taking you more seriously, and greatly decreasing the chances of you getting killed on a mission." Naruto wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Naruto begrudgingly agreed. "All right, anything else?" Benihime nodded and said, "Yes. I want you to drop that mask of yours and be your true self." Naruto was shocked by this. He had been acting like a clueless idiot for years. Naruto wasn't as dumb as he let on. He wasn't genius, mind you, but could have easily aced the exams at the academy. Well, that is, if they weren't rigged by Mizuki. He had hidden his intelligence, sadness, loneliness and sorrow from everyone to try and fit in. But he knew that it was time to stop, and with that he left his inner world and returned to the outside world. "Naruto, are you alright? You spaced out for a moment," the Hokage said as he placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto replied, "Sure, old man. I'm okay." The next day Naruto made his way to the academy to meet his team. He wore a black hoodie left unzipped, a dark green mesh shirt, blue pants with his forehead protector acting as a belt, his Zanpakuto in a simple sheath and tucked into his belt on the left side, black ninja shoes, and an orange and white striped bucket hat. As he entered his homeroom, he was received with surprised looks. "Naruto. This room is for people who graduated," Sakura screamed. Naruto smiled and pointed to his belt and said, "As you can see, I did graduate, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't blow out my eardrums with your banshee-like screeching." Sakura was royally pissed off at Naruto's response and ran up to him, ready to knock the living daylights out of him. But Naruto sighed as he drew his sword and said, "Scream, Benihime." And a red mist-like shield appeared in front of him, blocking the pink-haired banshee's punch. "Damn it. What was that?" Sakura screamed in pain as she held her bruised hand. Suddenly a raven-haired boy walked up to Naruto, who had dispersed his shield, and said in a demanding voice, "How did you do that?" "It was Sasuke Uchiha." Naruto chuckled and said, "Oh, I just used this little lady here." Naruto then showed off his sword, attracting everyone's attention as they gazed at the weapon. "Give me that sword, idiot. I can use it much better than you," Sasuke demanded. Naruto chuckled again and said, "Sorry, can't do it. You see, this is a Zanpakuto. Which means that this is a manifestation of my soul, and won't work for anyone but me." Sasuke scoffed and said, "Yeah, right. Give me that sword, you idiot." Naruto stepped a couple of feet back and made a slash at Sasuke as he said, "Scream, Benihime." And a red energy came from the sword and slammed into Sasuke, nearly putting him through a wall. Everyone was dumbstruck at Naruto's power, but didn't say anything as Iruka limped in on crutches followed by several Jonin. "Alright everyone, these are the teams for this year. When I call your names, report to your Jonin sensei," Iruka said as he began to read off the teams. A.N. Skipping everyone else but Team 7. Team 7 will be Ryu Ishida, Soifun, and Naruto Uzumaki. Your Jonin sensei will be Yoruichi Shihouin, Iruka said as he pointed to the dark-skinned woman with purple hair in a ponytail, who wore mainly black with only an orange shirt. Naruto followed his teammates, who he had seen around but never really talked to. They followed their sensei up to the roof of the academy. Naruto walked next to his teammates and got a good look at them. Uryu was a few inches taller than Naruto and had black hair, wore glasses and a white jacket and pants with a blue shirt. Naruto could tell he was fairly stuck up, but nowhere near the level of Sasuke. Then Naruto turned his attention to Soifun. From what Naruto knew about her, she had no family or clan, so she didn't know his last name and refused to be given one. She had short black hair and wore an all-black outfit with a dark gray sash around her waist. As they reached the roof, their sensei said, "All right. I am Yoruichi Shihouin, also known as the goddess of the flash. Now tell me about yourselves." Everyone's sweat dropped a little at her energy as she smiled widely. The three genin didn't exactly know what to say, so Yoruichi gave them a little help. "Come on. Just tell something about yourselves. Name, likes, dislikes, hobbies if you have any, dreams, stuff like that," Yoruichi said, trying to encourage the genin. Naruto spoke up and said, "Maybe you should go first, sensei. To break the ice, so to speak." Yoruichi thought for a moment and said, "Okay. As you already know, I'm Yoruichi Shihouin. My likes include soaking in hot springs and playing a nice game of tag. My dislikes include just about anything formal, whether it be clothes, manners, or people. I guess my hobbies would include finding new tag partners and perfecting my technique. And I reached my dream a couple of years ago when I became a jonin." Feeling a little more comfortable, Naruto said, "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. My likes are ramen, my sword, and goofing off. My dislikes are a certain Uchiha, people who take things way too seriously, and the time it takes ramen to cook. My hobbies are reading, gardening, and training. My dream is to become Hokage." Everyone was a little surprised by Naruto's introduction. While they had never really talked to Naruto, it was well known that he was a hyperactive loudmouthed idiot, so it was a little unexpected that he was this relaxed. It was Uryu's turn next. "My name is Uryu Ishida. My likes are peace and quiet. My dislikes are buttons and the word haphazard. My hobbies are archery, reading, sewing, and studying my clan's techniques. My dream is to bring the Ishida clan back into prominence." Everyone could tell he was trying to act cool, but chose not to mention the sewing part of his introduction. Next was Soifun. "My name is Soifun. My likes are cats and training. My dislikes are meat and idiot slackers. I don't really have any hobbies. My dream is to become the best kunoichi I can be." Yoruichi felt that Soifun could stand to open up more, but she would work on that provided the team passes her test. "All right. Now that the introductions are over, we can get down to business," the golden-eyed jonin said to her would-be team. "And what business would that be, sensei?" Naruto asked curiously. Yoruichi smiled widely and replied, "Just call me Yoruichi, and it's just a little test to see if you really become genin." The future genin couldn't hide their shock. They were under the impression that they already were genin. "Oh, you thought your had already passed? That genin exam was just to see who has the potential to be genin. The jonin assigned to the team gives the real test, which has a 66% chance of failure." Naruto, Uryu, and Soifun took a moment to process the information. Yoruichi then said, "Meet me at training ground 13 in the morning at 7 o'clock since I haven't really prepared a test," Yoruichi said as she did something that none of the three genin would ever forget. In a puff of smoke, their sensei turned into a black cat. "See you later," the cat said and hopped off the roof. She turned into a cat. Naruto deadpanned as the other two nodded their heads, too dumbstruck to speak. After getting over the shock of finding out their sensei was a were-cat, Naruto offered to buy his teammates lunch and they accepted, much to Naruto's delight. Now when Uryu and Soifun had agreed to lunch with Naruto, they knew Naruto would take them for ramen, based on what they learned from his introduction, but they didn't know Naruto's definition of treating someone was giving them coupons and expecting them to pay for their own meal. At any rate, they enjoyed their food and got a feel for each other's personalities. Naruto was the funny one, Uryu was the serious one, and Soifun was the quiet, serious one. After finishing their meal, Naruto said, "Well, I'll see you guys in the morning," Naruto said as he walked back to his apartment. On their way, however, he sensed the presence of a certain Uchiha. Naruto stopped walking and said, "Come on out, Sasuke, I know you're following me." The Uchiha then jumped in front of Naruto, a hatred burning in his eyes. "Fight me!" Sasuke practically barked. Naruto gave him a confused look and replied, "Why would I do that?" Sasuke growled and said, "I need to prove I'm stronger than you, so fight me." Naruto laughed a little and replied, "Sorry, but I have better things to do than feed your ego." Naruto then began to walk past Sasuke. Sasuke grabbed Naruto's arm and said, "It wasn't a request, it was a demand." Naruto grabbed his chin with his right hand, making it look like he was in deep thought, and said, "Well, when you put it like that, Naruto didn't finish because he kneed the egomaniacal Uchiha hard in the gut, causing him to fall over in pain. Naruto then continued on his way, but Sasuke wasn't done. The Uchiha recovered from the blow and ran up behind Naruto, ready to knock his lights out. Naruto sighed and drew Benihime and made a slash at Sasuke as he said, "Binding, Benihime." And a long red net came from the blade and entangled Sasuke. "Get me out of this, you stupid dead last," Sasuke roared. Naruto walked up and punched him in the face, knocking him out before dispersing the net. Naruto then picked Sasuke up and sat him on a bench, making it look like he was sleeping. Satisfied, Naruto headed to his apartment. Naruto, Shihouin, Uryu waited for 15 minutes at the training ground, not saying a word. Naruto glanced at Shihouin, who now sported a sword. The sword was sheathed horizontally behind the girl's lower back, hanging by a rope. Naruto then decided to break the silence and asked Uryu, "So you can use chakra arrows? How does that work?" Uryu adjusted his glasses and held his right hand out as a blue bow made of visible chakra appeared. Uryu then grabbed the string of the bow and drew it back, causing an arrow to form. The bespectacled archer took aim at a tree and fired, embedding the arrow deeply into the tree before it disappeared. Naruto whistled and said, "Now that sure as hell beats out of any bloodline I've seen." The archer turned to the blonde and said, "And what does that sword do?" Shihouin also wished to see what Naruto's sword was capable of. Naruto drew his Zanpakuto and said as he made a slash, "Scream, Benihime." And a red blast came from the sword and blasted a tree apart. Naruto turned and saw the shocked expressions of his teammates and chuckled as he said, "And that's not even the tip of the iceberg." It was at this moment Yoruichi showed up and said, "All right, now if you're down messing around we can get started." Everyone turned their attention to the dark-skinned beauty. The Warcat said, "All right, all you have to do is play a game of tag with me. If all three of you can tag me before an hour, then you pass." Naruto, Uryu, and Shihouin said at same time, "That's it." Yoruichi smiled and said, "Well, it won't be that easy." Yoruichi then disappeared, then reappeared right behind the genin. They turned around to look at her, but she had vanished again and reappeared back in front of them. "In case you're wondering, it's called Shunpo. You remember that technique I mentioned yesterday?" The genin nodded, their eyes bugging out of their heads as they began to sweat nervously. "Well, this is it. Don't worry though, I won't be using all the time during the test so you can have a fighting chance." The genin calmed down a little at that, but they were still wondering about their chances of passing. Naruto drew his sword, Uryu made a bow, and Shihouin had disappeared somewhere. "Ready, set, go," Yoruichi said as she ran into the surrounding forest. Naruto and Uryu gave chase, but Shihouin was still nowhere to be seen. Uryu shot a few arrows, trying to keep Yoruichi off balance, but it was a useless tactic as she easily outmaneuvered them. Naruto got an idea, and made a slash with his Zanpakuto as he said, "Razor, Benihime." And a red wave of energy came from the sword heading toward Yoruichi. She dodged but the attack followed her. It chased all the way into Naruto, who called off the attack and tagged her shoulder. Yoruichi was surprised at Naruto's strategic ability, but quickly recovered as Uryu fired more arrows around her. Yoruichi used Shunpo to get around them and ran deeper into the forest, leaving the two boys in the dust. Uryu looked over at Naruto and said, "Think Shihouin's in position yet?" Naruto smirked and replied, "She better be." Yoruichi ran through the forest at top speed when she suddenly tripped. Yoruichi picked herself up and saw a string of ninja wire on the ground. The Warcat got ready for whatever the genin had planned. Suddenly a black blur came down and attacked the genin. Yoruichi dodged and saw that it was Shihouin. Shihouin charged and almost managed to tag the older girl. Almost being the keyword here. Yoruichi easily dodged, and leapt over the younger girl. Shihouin thought quickly and touched the woman's leg. "Not bad. I didn't expect you to have such quick reflexes," Yoruichi complimented. Shihouin blushed a little at the compliment and replied, "Thank you, Yoruichi-sensei." Yoruichi chuckled and said, "Just call me Yoruichi." Shihouin nodded and replied, "Okay, Yoruichi-sensei." The Warcat's sweat dropped a little, but disregarded it. Suddenly a flurry of chakra arrows surrounded them, followed by a red net that came down on top of Yoruichi. Uryu then appeared and touched her shoulder as he said, Tag, you're it. The Werkat smiled and said. Not bad. You all pass. Naruto then dispelled the net, and walked over to his team. So now what? Naruto asked. Yoruichi gave a sly smile and said. Next I file my report, then tomorrow you go on your first mission. The official Team 7 smiled as Yoruichi used Shunpo to vanish. Ryu and Soifun headed to their respective homes, but Naruto stayed for a moment as he was pulled into his inner world by Benihime. Wielder of the Crimson Princess. Naruto and all related characters belong to Masashi Kishimoto. Bleach and all related characters belong to Tite Kubo. Omake Chapter. It was sunny morning in Konohagakure. Naruto, Ryu, and Soifun were walking down the street, headed to their usual training ground, when suddenly someone tackled Naruto to the ground. It was Mr. Duck Ass, Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke picked Naruto up by his shirt and yelled in his face. You are going to fight me? Naruto smirked and replied. Sure, but not right here. How about you meet me on top of the Hokage monument in 10 minutes? Sasuke seemed appeased and released Naruto as he headed for the monument. Naruto dusted himself off and as soon as Sasuke was out of sight, said. Alright, let's go meet Yoruichi. His teammates looked at him curiously. Soifun said. Aren't you going to meet Sasuke for your fight? Naruto smiled and replied. Oh no, I just want to see how long he'll wait up there before he realizes I'm not coming. Ryu gave a small smirk and said. That's evil. Naruto chuckled and replied. Oh, I'm sure he'll only be there for about an hour before he gives up. And so the genin left to meet their sensei. Later that night, Naruto was sleeping peacefully in his bed, when suddenly a loud banging on his front door woke him up. Naruto looked over at his clock and it read 4:10 a.m. Naruto groaned and got out of bed as the banging continued. Naruto looked through the peephole and saw a very, very angry Sasuke standing there. I know you're home, Uzumaki. Naruto slowly backed away from the door, extremely creeped out, and grabbed Benihime. I waited at the Hokage monument for 16 hours. Now come out and fight me. Sasuke roared. Naruto then heard him walk away from the door. Naruto sighed in relief, but soon panicked when he heard Sasuke trying to break his door down. Naruto then got an idea. The blonde went over and opened the window above his bed that just happened to align perfectly with his front door. Outside, Sasuke walked a distance away and got a running start ready to smash the door in. But just before Sasuke could make contact, the door opened and Naruto got behind him with his Zanpakuto as he yelled. Scream, Benihime, and a blast of red hit Sasuke in the back and sent him flying out the window and crashing into the window of another apartment across the street. Naruto laughed as he closed his window and heard a woman scream. Anbu, come quick, rapist. It had been a few weeks since Team 7 had begun doing missions, though the term mission could be used loosely. Chores were a better fit as far as Naruto was concerned and, after all, since when did it take military manpower to paint someone's house? Naruto made it no secret on how he hated the menial labor, and while Ryu and Soifun weren't exactly thrilled with the so-called missions either, they kept their complaints to themselves, unlike their blonde teammate who complained almost constantly. It was after one particularly aggravating mission involving a runaway house cat, that Naruto decided to take things up with the Hokage after they made their report. However, before he could begin his plan of pleading with the old man, Yoruichi said. I've been thinking, old man, and I feel that my team is ready for a C-rank mission. To say that Naruto was happy would be an understatement. The old Hokage thought for a moment and replied. Well, if you're sure, Yoruichi, then I suppose I'll allow it. The Hokage then looked through a few folders and then pulled a file from one of them. The only C-rank mission I have available at the moment is a mission to the Land of Grass to pick up a shipment new scrolls. While it didn't sound like much, Naruto was just happy to get a mission out of the village. We'll take it, Naruto spoke up, much to his teammates' annoyance, though they also agreed to the mission. Well then, report to the main gate in the morning at 6 o'clock. Sarutobi said as he went back to his paperwork. Team 7 was about 20 miles outside of Konoha and Naruto was starting to wish he was back home, as it was 50 more miles before they reached the Land of Grass. Apparently Naruto forgot that an away mission meant a lot of walking. Ryu, who was also tired of walking, leaned in next to Naruto and whispered in a rather harsh tone. The next time you want a mission outside the village, make sure to ask just how far it is." Naruto slowly nodded. He only had himself to blame. He could have waited for another C-rank mission, preferably one not so far away, but no, he had to jump on this one. Naruto sighed and trudged on with his team. It was soon late afternoon, and after walking all day, the genin were exhausted while Yoruichi was only a little tired. The dark-skinned beauty turned to her team and gave a feline grin and said, "Oh come on, you guys aren't tired are you? And I was planning on giving you some training." The genin groaned, so the work had decided to give them a little mercy. "It's still another 45 miles before we get there and we're losing light, so let's set up camp." Naruto, Ryu, and Shihouin gave a sigh of relief as they went into a clearing in the surrounding forest and unloaded their backpacks. After collecting firewood and laying out their sleeping bags, Team 7 took the chance to relax and rest their aching feet. It was later that night and Naruto, Shihouin, and Ryu were sleeping peacefully. But Yoruichi was wide awake. She felt something in the air, like something was going to happen that night. It wasn't long before the sound of a shuriken came whizzing through the night air. Yoruichi dodged and woke her team. The genin quickly got to their feet and got in a defensive position. Suddenly more shuriken came from the woods. The leaf ninja dodged them as their attackers stepped into the pale moonlight of the clearing. They were sound ninja, 8 to be precise. Well, looks like we got some leaf ninja out by their lonesome. Let's capture them, they could be worth something. The leader of the sound ninja said as he charged forward. Naruto yelled, "Razor Benihime," and sliced 2 of the sound nin in half, as he quickly stabbed 2 more. Shihouin quickly disappeared and stabbed 1 of them in the back. Ryu shot 2 between the eyes, and Yoruichi made quick work of the rest by using her shunpo. "What was that about?" Naruto asked. "No one in particular," Yoruichi replied. "The sound is a fairly new hidden village, and for some reason they have it out for leaf ninja." Naruto was about to say something else, but he heard some rustling from a bush a few feet next to him. Naruto wasn't the only one who heard it, as Ryu and Shihouin made their way closer to the noise. Ryu made a chakra bow, Shihouin drew her sword, and Naruto got ready with Benihime. Yoruichi heard the rustling as well, but knew that she could jump in quick if it was an enemy. The genin slowly made their way over to the bush, weapons trained on the plant. As they got close, a streak of pink plopped out and they pointed their weapons at it, only to be rather embarrassed when they say that it was a little girl that looked to be around 6. She had pink hair that reminded Naruto of Sakura, and wore dirty and worn-out cloths and had her hand tied behind her back by a thick rope. It was clear that she was a prisoner of the sound ninja. Shihouin took out a kunai and cut her free and half expected her to run from her and her team since they were also ninja. But the girl did something totally unexpected. She reached out and touched Naruto's blood-covered zanpakuto and laughed, unnerving the team. "This is neat," the girl exclaimed. Naruto was a little shocked and stammered out, "Why you shouldn't touch that?" Naruto then cleared his throat and said more clearly, "It's a dangerous weapon." The girl laughed and said, "I like you whiskers." Naruto blinked a few times, giving the name time to sink in. Before he could say anything in response though, Yoruichi walked over and bent down to the girl's level and asked her, "What were you doing with those ninja?" Yoruichi already had an idea but hoped she was wrong. The girl thought for a moment and said, "They said something about selling me or something. Do you have any candy?" Yoruichi got angry at the first part and chuckled a little at the last part. "Do you know where your mommy or daddy are?" Naruto asked the abnormally cheerful little girl. She replied in a slightly somber yet still somehow cheerful voice, "I don't have a mommy or daddy." This struck a chord with Naruto. He looked to his team, silently asking for permission which he received. Naruto then said, "Would you like to come with us?" The girl then yelled, "Really whiskers?" "Sure." The girl then tackled Naruto the ground, hugging him as tight as she could. The next day Team 7 neared their destination. However, there was one more to their number, the little pink-haired girl they rescued. Despite the fact that she was clearly mistreated by the sound ninja and that she was an orphan, she was still cheerful and innocent, much to the surprise of Naruto and company. At first Naruto thought that it was an act like the one he used to put up, but when he looked into her eyes he didn't see the same loneliness he saw in his own reflection. No, this little girl was different. Naruto was walking a ways behind his team because he barely got any sleep the previous night since his new little friend insisted on sleeping on top of him and kept tossing and turning all over him, making sleep almost impossible. Speaking of the girl, she was currently slung over Naruto's shoulder, facing forward. "This is fun. I'm gonna ride on you all the time, Whiskers." Naruto chuckled a little at what was now her permanent nickname for him. "You do know my name is Naruto, right?" Naruto questioned in a tired yet playful tone. The girl giggled and replied, "I know, but Whiskers sounds better." All this talk of names suddenly made Naruto realize that he forgot to ask the little pinkett her name. He was slightly embarrassed since he had known her for about 6 hours, not including the time she was asleep, and didn't think to ask for her name. "Hey, I just realized that you never told us your name," Naruto said to his passenger. The girl's almost perpetual smile then faded and she replied in a somber tone, "I don't have a name." Any feeling of tiredness Naruto had disappeared when he heard that, only to be replaced with total shock. Naruto stopped walking and stood silent for a few moments, causing his little friend to worry that she said something wrong. Just then Naruto said, "How about Yakyu?" The girl looked at him curiously and replied, "What about it?" Naruto then said, "For a name. Do you like it?" The girl thought for a moment then replied, "It sounds neat." Naruto smiled and began walking again as he said, "All right, Yakyu it is." The newly dubbed Yakyu giggled and said, "Hey Whiskers, how do you think of a name so fast?" Naruto shrugged, careful not to disturb Yakyu, and said, "I read it in a book once." Yakyu blinked a couple of times before replying, "What's a book?" Naruto's sweat dropped a little at that. Naruto made a mental note to take Yakyu to a library when they got back to Konoha. Team 7 reached the land of grass and headed for the store they were supposed to pick up the scrolls from. They found the store with little trouble and entered. Yoruichi walked up to the counter that was being run by an elderly woman. "Hello there, we're here to pick up some scroll for Konohagakure." The old woman looked through her register book and replied, "Oh yes, here we are. I'm sorry to say that we've been a little backed up, so it may take a while to find your order." At this Ryu spoke up and asked, "How much is a while?" The old woman chuckled and replied, "Oh, about 30 or 40 minutes at the most." The woman then closed her book, then walked over to the door that led to a back room and opened it as she called out, "Momo, Toshiro 1, I need you to find the Konoha order." A young female voice called back and saying, "Okay Granny." Naruto was looking around the store when his hat was suddenly yanked down over his eyes. Naruto readjusted his hat as he heard Yakyu laughing. Naruto looked at her out of the corner of his eye as she said, "I'm bored, let's go get some candy." Naruto sighed as turned to his team and said, "I'm going to get Yakyu some candy, I'll be right back." Yoruichi nodded and said, "All right, just don't go too far, because as soon as we get the scrolls we're headed out. Oh, and don't give her too much sugar." Naruto nodded as he turned to head for the door. Yakyu turned herself around on Naruto's shoulder and waved as she said, "Bye Four Eyes, bye Pigtails, bye Kitty too." Naruto's team blinked in surprise at their new nicknames as Naruto walked out the door. Naruto walked around the town, looking for the nearest candy shop. However, being in a strange town and not having any idea where anything was made it harder. Also Yakyu was no help as she kept telling him where to go and, against his better judgment, Naruto listened to her. Pretty soon they were in a bad part of the town, and Naruto realized that they were lost. As they walked, Naruto came across a fairly large man with an eye patch that was sitting on a barrel in front of a bar. Naruto decided to ask for directions, albeit begrudgingly as the guy was kind of scary looking. Naruto swallowed down his apprehensions and asked the man, "Excuse me, but could you give me some directions? I'm not from here and I'm a little lost." The man turned his attention to Naruto and was about to say something, but he noticed Naruto's sword and paused as a large smile formed on his face. "That's a nice looking sword, kid." Naruto instinctually placed his hand on the hilt of his Zanpakuto as he said, Thanks. Now about those directions." The man got up, and Naruto then noticed the long sword strapped to his hip. "How about you and me go at it for a while? After all, what kind of swordsman refuses a fight?" the man said as he walked closer to Naruto. That sounds fun. Yakyu spoke up, causing Naruto to panic. The man who was towering over the blonde then said, "I'll take that as a yes." The man then drew his sword and made a slash at Naruto. Naruto dodged and took off running. "Come back here and fight me," the man roared as he chased after the blonde. Naruto ran down the streets, with Yakyu laughing on his shoulder and the crazed swordsman chasing after him. Naruto ran into a wide alleyway, but unfortunately for him it was a dead end. Naruto turned around and saw the man stop in front of him, the crazed smile still on his face. The man pointed his battered and chipped sword at Naruto and said, "Time for some fun." Naruto quickly grabbed Yakyu from his shoulder and sat her down on the ground as he said, "Yakyu, find somewhere safe and stay there, this won't take long." Yakyu pouted and replied, "But I wanna watch." Naruto snapped back, "Just do what I said." Yakyu looked a little scared by Naruto's outburst, so Naruto bent down to ear level and gently said, "Look, just go over there and I'll deal with this, okay?" Yakyu nodded and jumped up on top of a dumpster to watch the fight. The giant of a man that had been chasing them said, "Well, now that that's settled, let's get to fighting." The lunatic then lunged at Naruto, ready to strike with his sword. Despite his large size, the man was extremely fast and closed the distance between them quickly. Seeing this, Naruto quickly shouted, "Scream, Benihime," and his sword generated a red mist-like shield which blocked the attack. Naruto smirked confidently, at least until he saw that the larger man's sword was poking inside his shield with the tip of the blade just a few inches from his face. To say that Naruto was surprised would be an understatement. No one had ever broken through his shield. Not even Yuryu's chakra arrows could puncture it. Naruto was shaken from his thoughts as the man removed his blade from the shield and began to strike again. Naruto though quickly and shouted, "Shred, Benihime," and several shots of crimson energy shot out of the shield, whistling like rockets as they exploded against the monster of a man and pushed him back down the alley. Naruto smiled as the man was barely standing up. "Yeah, way to go, Whiskers," Yakyu cheered. Naruto smirked and said in a confident tone, "Fight's over." The man slowly got up and replied, "What are you talking about? Things are just getting fun." The eye-patched madman charged again. Naruto was shocked that the man could even walk, let alone run after that attack. Naruto quickly held up his sword and began to dodge and parry the many slashed and stabs the monster of a man sent his way. Naruto made a stab, but the man quickly grabbed the tip of his sword and lifted him of the ground as he tried to stab Naruto. Naruto quickly maneuvered out of the way and kicked the man hard in the chest with both feet and bounded away from him. The man laughed a deep crazed laugh and said, "Not bad, kid. What's your name?" Naruto breathlessly replied, "Naruto Uzumaki." The man nodded and replied, "Kenpachi Zaraki." Kenpachi then charged once again, ready for another barrage of slashes and stabs. Naruto made a quick slash and yelled, "Scream Benihime," and sent a red blast of energy at Kenpachi which sent him flying backward. Naruto was extremely tired from walking all day, so he hoped that attack was enough to end this fight. Naruto's hopes were soon dashed as Kenpachi got up yet again. Naruto felt like yelling at the top of his lungs every curse word he had ever heard, but didn't as there was a child present. Kenpachi started laughing yet again and said, "Since you're going all out, why don't I?" Naruto's heart almost shot out of his chest when he heard that. He was holding back. Naruto screamed in his mind as he suddenly got the feeling that he was going to die. Kenpachi reached for his eye patch and yanked it off. An eruption of chakra threw Naruto off his feet. Naruto looked over to if Yakyu was alright. She was now inside the dumpster peeking out, much to Naruto's relief and disgust. Kenpachi made a swipe with his sword at the abandoned building next to them and it came crashing down as he said, "Time for round 2. Naruto whimpered a little as Kenpachi charged forward again. Yoruichi, Soifun, and Ryu were waiting outside the scroll store for Konoha's order, when they suddenly felt a massive amount of chakra being unleashed. They all turned their attention to the other side of town where it looked like a building had exploded. That also happened to be the direction Naruto went when he left the store, and that was all that Yoruichi needed to check it out. "You two stay here and wait for the scrolls, I'm going to check this out." The two genin nodded as the purple-haired jonin disappeared in a cloud of dust. Naruto was barely even close to holding his own against Kenpachi. Naruto never met a demon. Well, he met one, but it had turned into his Zanpakuto, so that didn't count for him, but this man was probably the closest thing he would ever get. Naruto barely dodged another one of Kenpachi's slashes, as it cut his shoulder. Naruto had one's chance and just one chance to make it out alive. Naruto made a slash as he yelled, "Binding, Benihime," and a red energy net covered Kenpachi. Naruto then bent down and was about to stab the net, when suddenly he heard someone yell, "Getsuga Tensho." Yoruichi was closing in on the downed building, hoping that Naruto was alright. As she got there, she heard someone yell, "Getsuga Tensho." Yoruichi instantly recognized the name of that attack and really laid on the speed. It can't be him. He's dead, Yoruichi thought as she was about to reach her destination. When she got there, she saw a man passed out in front of Naruto who was looking up at something. Naruto looked and saw Kenpachi was knocked out in front of him. "Looks like you owe me one, kid." Naruto looked up and saw a man on top of a building with a large sword without a hilt wrapped in black wrappings and was silver with a black blade. The man jumped down and Naruto got a better look at him. He had ghostly pale skin and chalk-white hair, black nails, and yellow irises with black sclera. He also wore an all-white shihakusho with a gray strap across his torso. At this moment Yoruichi came up next to Naruto, looked him over to make sure he wasn't too hurt before she turned her attention back to Naruto's apparent savior. My, Yoruichi Shihouin. Just as beautiful as I remember," the man said as he propped his massive sword on his shoulder. Yoruichi replied, "Hello, Shiro." Tea was an average day in Konohagakure. And to a certain Uzumaki, average meant boring. Naruto was walking down the streets, looking for something interesting to do. Suddenly a voice that came from his shoulder said, "I'm bored, Whiskers." Naruto sighed as he replied, "So am I, Yakyu, so am I." At this moment he saw a certain Uchiha walking up to him. Naruto was expecting the usual, "Fight me, you loser," but Sasuke didn't seem to notice him. As the Uchiha got closer, Naruto saw that he was covered with dirt, cuts, and scraps. Either he had just gotten back from a mission, or Sakura had snapped from not being able to pound Naruto and turned on Sasuke. Naruto really hoped it was the last one. As Sasuke came up on Naruto, the blonde said, "What, no fight today?" While Naruto didn't want to fight the egomaniac, he knew that Sasuke was in no shape to do anything. Sasuke turned to Naruto and said, "Shut up, loser. As soon as I'm done in the bathhouse I'm going to beat you senseless." Naruto stepped aside to allow the Uchiha to pass. "Bye, duck butt," Yakyu yelled at Sasuke, who stiffened at the nickname but kept walking. As soon as Sasuke was out of sight, Naruto started running full speed to the bathhouse. "Where are we going, Whiskers?" Yakyu asked. Naruto smirked and said, "We just found something fun to do, Yakyu." Sasuke entered the bathhouse, walked up to the front desk and rung the bell. After a minute a girl with long blonde hair in two pigtails and blue eyes walked out of a back room and up to the desk. Sasuke thought she looked familiar but put the thought out of his head and was about to order a bath, but the girl quickly said, "I'm sorry, sir, but the entire bathhouse has been rented out." Sasuke's eye twitched as he asked, "By who?" The girl looked at a book and replied, "A Mr. Itachi Uchiha." Sasuke's eyes widened before he yelled, "Where is he?" The girl looked frightened and replied, "D down the H hall to the L left." Sasuke then ran off. As soon as he was gone, the girl did a hand sign and in a puff of smoke revealed herself to be Naruto. At this moment Yakyu poked her head out from under the desk and said, "Now what, Whiskers?" Naruto grabbed her hand and began walk out the door as he said, "Now we wait." Sasuke ran down the hallway until he came to a door. The maniacal Uchiha kicked the door down and yelled, "All right, let's do this." He then saw Yoruichi, Kurenai, Soifun, Yugao, and Anko in a bath. Yoruichi stood up and said, "All right, girls, let's get to work." The woman nodded and tackled the Uchiha as they began to pound him into the floor. As Naruto and Yakyu stood outside the street, they heard the horrific and pained screams of one Sasuke Uchiha. After 20 minutes of screaming, things went quiet. Soon Sasuke walked out of the bathhouse bloody, bruised, and dripping wet with a bar of soap jammed in his mouth. The mangled Uchiha walked up to the blonde as he took the bar of soap out of his mouth and said, "I don't know how, but I know you were behind this." Sasuke then passed out. Yakyu laughed and said as Naruto put her on his shoulder, "You were right, Whiskers. That was cool." "Hello, Shiro," Yoruichi said in a cold voice as she kept her eyes on the pale man. The man gave a slightly psychotic grin and replied, "Ah, I'm hurt. Aren't you happy to see an old teammate?" Naruto, who was currently being hugged to death by Yakyu, who was praising Naruto's fighting skills, was taken aback by the man's words. He was on a team with Yoruichi. "I'd be happier if you weren't a nuke nin that betrayed Konoha." Shiro's smirk fell as he said, "Can I help it if that stupid old man wanted me to wipe out the Uchihas?" Yoruichi's and Naruto's eyes widened at this. Itachi was the one who killed them, and I can assure you that the Hokage didn't order anything like that. Yoruichi responded, in the same cold manner. The pale nuke nin chuckled and replied, "Really? He roped old Itachi into it, huh? But that aside, he did make the order. Why else would I leave?" The Cat said, "Because you're a psychopathic degenerate." At this Shiro chuckled and replied, "Okay, you got me there. It's no secret that I've got a few screws loose and that I have a somewhat questionable conscience, but I would never wipe out a whole clan." Yoruichi gave the man a stern look, causing him to say, "Okay, I probably would if they did something to really piss me off, but the Uchihas didn't. Sure, almost all of them were annoying blowhards, but they didn't deserve that." At this moment Naruto said, "Okay, who is this guy?" The two ninja glanced over at the boy who had a pink-haired girl on his shoulder. Shiro opened his mouth to introduce himself, but Yoruichi beat him to the punch and said, "He's Shiro Kurosaki, better known as the Ghost of the Leaf." Naruto's eyes widened as he recognized that name. The Ghost of the Leaf was infamous in the elemental countries for being a brutal fighter, rarely leaving anyone alive after a fight, and his pale skin and white hair. Naruto mentally cursed himself for not recognizing the man sooner. He was after all a legend for being able to fight the third Hokage to a standstill while he was still a genin. Shiro saw the blonde's look of realization and said, "Give the kid a prize, he finally recognizes me. Honestly, what are they teaching at the academy these days?" Naruto was about to say something, but Yoruichi said, "What are you doing here, Shiro?" The pale man rubbed his chin in faux thought, before saying, "Well, I just happened to be passing through town, looking for something fun to do." Shiro stopped when he saw the look on the kunoichi's face darken when he said fun. She knew all too well that Shiro's idea of fun usually involved a lot of property damage and explosions. Shiro cleared his throat as he continued, "Anyway, while I was walking around I came across the kid fighting Pachi over there and decided to watch." Naruto looked incredulously at the albino swordsman for a few moments before shouted, "You mean you could have stopped him at any time?" Shiro shrugged and replied, "Yeah, but it looked like you were holding your own." Naruto then shouted again, "I almost died." Shiro laughed and replied, "I said it looked like you were holding your own. I could tell that you were gonna give a one-way trip to the afterlife near the end, so I stepped in." Shiro then sheathed the massive sword he was propping on his shoulder behind his back as black cloth began wrap around it until it was covered. "Well, it's been fun seeing you again, Yoruichi, but I gotta get going," Shiro said as he turned his back to the Konoha ninja and began to walk off. Suddenly a kunai whizzed past his head, cutting a little of his chalk-white hair. "You know I can't just let you walk away, Shiro," Yoruichi said as she reached for another kunai. The pale man chuckled and said, "As a word of friendly advice to an old teammate, you really don't want to do this." The dark-skinned kunoichi replied, "It doesn't matter if I want to, it's my duty." Shiro unsheathed his sword, the black cloth unwrapping until it was a 6-foot-long strip dangling off the end of the butt of the tang. "Just so I know before we start, there's nothing that'll change your mind." Yoruichi shook her head before saying, "You going soft?" Shiro gave a psychotic grin as he said, "Not on your life. Just want to make sure you know what you're doing, because old teammate or not, you know how I fight and it won't end well for you." Yoruichi then said, "Don't be so wise, Shiro. I'm a jonin now and you were still a fresh chunin when you left." The man chuckled darkly and said, "What? You think I haven't trained at all in the time I've been gone?" Yoruichi raised an eyebrow as she said, "So I take it you have some new tricks." Shiro laughed in a crazed tone and replied. Yeah, but I'll wait before busting them out. That is if you can survive until then. Yoruichi gripped her kunai tight and used Shunpo to attack, followed by Shiro doing the same. Naruto's eyes went wide as he saw that Shiro knew how to use his sensei's special technique. As the two combatants fought, Shiro said, "Bet you regret teaching me Shunpo right now, don't you?" Yoruichi scowled and replied, "I didn't teach you, you figured it out by spying on me." Shiro responded, "In my defense, I only spied on you in the hopes of seeing you naked." This earned him a kick to the stomach. Shiro leapt away and said breathlessly, "Personally, I expected it in the nuts for that one." Yoruichi smirked and replied, "You moved." The two then began their fight anew. Ryu and Soifin had already picked up the order and Yoruichi was still not back with Naruto and Yakyu. "Looks like we need to find Yoruichi-sensei now," Soifin said. Ryu, who was loading the last crate of scrolls into a cart, replied, "We can't just leave the order, someone could steal it." Soifin wondered who he thought would steal blank scrolls, but figured that it could be a possibility. "Why don't you just take the cart?" Ryu adjusted his glasses and replied, "And push it all the down there and then all the way back home." Soifin thought for a moment before saying, "Just have Naruto do it." Ryu liked that idea and followed Soifin to the site of the downed building. Naruto watched in awe at the speed in which Yoruichi was fighting the nuke nin, while Yakyu was cheering, "Kitty, on." The two were nearly evenly matched, with Yoruichi being the faster of the two. Naruto assumed that since she invented the technique, Yoruichi had an infinitely greater understanding of Shunpo than Shiro, who seemed to have worked out a rough version of from watching the work at. Naruto wanted to help, but he knew he was outclassed and he was still hurt from his fight with Kenpachi, so all he could do was sit and watch. The Ghost of the Leaf fought like a madman, giving little thought to his own safety as he tried to overpower Yoruichi, who kicked him hard in the chest which sent him flying back into a wall. At this moment, Shiro took hold of the long strip of black cloth that was hanging off his sword and began to swing the massive cleaver-like blade like a flail and began to attack Yoruichi from a distance, but the purple-haired Jonin dodged the attacks like they were nothing. "Thought you said you had some new tricks, Shiro. I've seen all this before," Yoruichi said as she kept dodging. Shiro then pulled his sword back to himself and pointed it toward his old teammate as the black cloth that hung off the end of his sword began to wrap around his arm as he said, "You wanna see something new? Fine." Shiro then shouted, "Bankai," and a blinding flash of light erupted, engulfing everyone in the alley. The light died down then disappeared and the sound of crazed laughter echoed throughout the alley. Naruto, Yakyu, and Yuichi looked at Shiro and saw that he now wore a long white coat that was tattered at the bottom with black lining. His sword had also changed from a giant cleaver to an all-white katana that had a cross guard in the shape of a manji symbol and a small chain with a broken link on the end of the hilt. Shiro grabbed the small chain with his left hand and began to twirl the sword rapidly before throwing it in the air and catching it with his right hand. He then disappeared and reappeared behind Yoruichi. The Cat was shocked at his speed. He was even faster than when she used Shunpo. Suddenly Yoruichi felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. She looked and saw a deep cut, as Shiro said in a low whisper, "Tensa Zanjetsu." He then vanished then reappeared in front of the Jonin and said, "Ready for round 2. Yoruichi was now fighting an uphill battle against Shiro, who had become faster and stronger since activating his Bankai. Yoruichi had no idea what this Bankai was, but she didn't have time to question it. Naruto on the other hand knew exactly what it was. In his training with Benihime in his inner world, Naruto learned the release states for a Zanpakuto, the first being the sealed state, the second being Shikai, and the third being Bankai. Benihime told Naruto that Bankai was the most powerful state of a Zanpakuto and usually took years of intense training in order to achieve it. All this meant one thing: Shiro Kurosaki had a Zanpakuto. "I need to help Yoruichi, she doesn't stand a chance alone." Naruto thought as he tried to move, but his body was still exhausted and he had to keep his shoulder wound from bleeding too heavily. "You know Shiro, I heard you died a year ago, something about how you got into a fight with Orochimaru," Yoruichi said as she was barely dodging the pale madman's sword swipes. At this Shiro growled and replied, "Oh, that sore loser just told everyone that because he didn't want to admit I nearly finished him off." Yoruichi was shocked for a split second, but remembered that Shiro was capable of giving Sarutobi a run for his money when they were on a team, and he challenged the old man to a fight. In spite of the dire situation she was in, Yoruichi found herself thinking back to when Shiro began to change into what he was now. Flash back 10 years ago. It was a cloudy and windy day in Konoha, as a young dark-skinned girl with short purple hair and yellow cat-like eyes made her way to her home. Her name was Yoruichi Shihouin, and she was having a very bad day. Not only was she humiliated after by that idiot Jin Ichimaru who kept calling her kitty litter, but she had to deal with the fact that her so-called best friend had practically abandoned her to do something or other with his family when this was going on. Yoruichi sighed and opened her apartment door and walked inside. Her parents had died 4 years ago, so she lived alone, but she had inherited enough money to live comfortably and pay for the required items she needed at the Ninja Academy. Yoruichi plopped down on the couch and sighed rather loudly in frustration. She had thought about hanging out with her other friend, one Byakuya Kuchiki, but he was busy with his grandfather learning the ropes to become the next head of the Kuchiki clan. She thought of training by herself, but she just wasn't in the mood. Eventually she decided to take a nap, as she didn't really feel like doing anything else. Soon she drifted off to a not-so-peaceful slumber. However, after about 40 minutes a knocking at her door awoke her. She forced herself from her couch and went over to her front door, opening it to reveal a boy with ghostly pale skin, chalk-white hair, and yellow and black eyes. "Shiro, what are you doing here? I thought you had something to do with your family," Yoruichi asked her friend. She then noticed his puffy tear-stained cheeks, clear signs he had been crying. In all the time she had known him, Yoruichi had never seen Shiro cry, so she knew something had happened. "What happened, Shiro?" the dark-skinned girl asked with great concern in her voice. The pale boy before her then said barely above a whisper, "Mom, Ichigo." Yoruichi looked confused. What did his mother and twin brother have to do with him crying? But before she could ask another question, her pale friend had pulled her into a hug and began to sob. Yoruichi brought him inside and let him cry himself out, but she never did get him to say what had happened. No, it would be a few days later that Yoruichi would learn that Shiro's mother Masaki, a civilian, and his brother had drowned when they fell into a rushing river. From could be gathered from Shiro, Masaki had fell in, and Ichigo, ever the protector, jumped in after her. After finding this out, Yoruichi ran off to find Shiro to comfort him. Yoruichi thought about how different Shiro and Ichigo were as she ran. Not only was Shiro ghostly pale, but was far more manic than his twin. Ichigo on the other hand was more reserved and was, as far as Shiro was concerned, the favorite. As such they fought like crazy about everything, with Shiro being the one who usually instigated the confrontations. However, Yoruichi never doubted that Shiro loved his brother. The fact that he also lost his mother on the same day, made the young cat all the more worried for her friend. When she reached Shiro's house she frantically knocked on the door, desperate to help her best friend through this. "Shiro, open up, I know you're home, I just wanna talk," Yoruichi yelled as kept knocking. Suddenly the door opened as she was about to knock again and she accidentally punched her pale friend in the nose. "What the hell?" Shiro yelled as held his now bleeding nose. "Shiro, I'm sorry," Yoruichi said as she tried to look at his nose. Shiro snapped back in a somewhat nasally voice. "Forget about it. What do you want anyway?" Yoruichi was a little taken aback by her friend's crabby demeanor, but disregarded it as grief talking. "I came to see if you were all right," the young cat said. "I was all right until you decided to break my nose," Shiro replied still in a nasally voice due to his struck nose. Yoruichi sighed and said, "I said I was sorry." She then noticed that Mr. Kurosaki hadn't ran up to greet her as usual. She assumed he was somewhere in the house grieving, but Shiro answered her unasked question. "Dad's on a mission. He won't be back until tomorrow," the pale boy said as wiped the blood from his nose. They stayed silent for a while before Shiro said, "I don't feel like talking right now, Yoruichi," and with that he shut the door. Yoruichi sighed and left, deciding that perhaps time will help him. It had been a week since their encounter and Yoruichi had grown increasingly worried about Shiro. His father hadn't returned from his mission yet, and Shiro seemed to be changing. Shiro had always been a bit of a wildcard and a joker, something that made him and Yoruichi get along so well, but recently he had been a little darker with how he joked. He had also gotten more ruthless and menacing when sparring at the academy, and was starting to scare Yoruichi a bit. One day after class, Yoruichi decided to find out what was going on. The cat girl decided to ask the Hokage what was happening since he was close with the Kurosakis. Yoruichi entered Sarutobi's office with a visible look of determination. Sarutobi looked up from his accursed paperwork and said, "What can I do for you today, Miss Shihouin?" The dark-skinned girl replied, "It's about Shiro Kurosaki. I know you're a good friend to his family and I thought you could tell what's going on with him. He's my best friend but he won't tell me anything." The Hokage sighed and replied, "I'm afraid I know why Shiro has been acting the way he does. His father, Isshin Kurosaki, died on his last mission. I'm afraid that after losing his mother and brother, followed by his father in so short a time has caused a radical change in his personality. I'm afraid that anything of the old Shiro Kurosaki is gone for the moment and only time will help him." Yoruichi was in a state of shock and sadness. Shock at the fact that Shiro had been dealing with all this by himself without telling her, and sadness that her friend would never be the same. Flashback end. Yoruichi sighed as she continued to barely avoid Shiro's attacks. Shiro again used his incredible new speed and made a slash at Yoruichi, who managed to get a kunai up in time to block, but he stopped just before he made contact which caught the Werkat off guard. The ghost of the leaf gave a psychotic smirk and whimpered, "Getsuga Tensho." And a white and red energy came from the ivory sword which engulfed the area, destroying the other building in the process. Naruto quickly threw up his blood mist shield, which began to chip away bit by bit from energy from Shiro's attack. When the attack dissipated, Yoruichi was lying unconscious but alive. Shiro frowned as he raised his sword above his head and said, "I'm sorry it had to end like this, Yoruichi." But before he could bring the sword down, a chakra arrow struck him in the shoulder. "What the hell?" Shiro yelled as the arrow disappeared and he clutched his bleeding shoulder. The ghost of the leaf turned to see a boy with glasses holding a bow made of visible chakra and he had another chakra arrow ready to fire. Next to him was a girl with short hair and 2 long pigtails in the back and had a short sword drawn. "Back away from our sensei," the boy said as he took aim, ready to fire if need be. Shiro chuckled and said, "Looks like the kiddies want to play. All right then." Shiro then charged, as a Ryu began to fire arrows. Shiro swatted them away with his sword as he began to shout, "Getsuga Tens," however he was interrupted by a voice that yelled, "Scream, Benihime," and a red blast of energy struck him in the back, cancelling his attack. Shiro turned around and growled at Naruto who smirked back at the pale swordsman. "Forget these two, you die first, Blondie." Shiro snarled at Naruto, as a black and red energy covered his blade. He then made a horizontal slash at Naruto and yelled, "Kuroi Getsuga." Shiro's attack headed straight for Naruto. The blonde could barely move as it was, so he just closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable. But after a minute he didn't feel anything, so he slowly opened his eyes and saw Yakyu standing in front of him with a pink chakra surrounding her. It usually took a ninja years before their chakra became visible, so seeing a little girl do it was downright amazing. "Leave Whiskers alone," Yakyu yelled angrily as the chakra took the form of an angry cat face. Naruto also noticed a small sword in Yakyu's hand with a pink hilt with a guard shaped like a 5-petaled flower. Yakyu suddenly disappeared, then reappeared in front of the albino madman and stabbed him in the gut with her new sword. Shiro fell over holding his stomach, he red blood staining his all-white attire. Slowly the pale madman got up, trying to hold in his blood with his hand, and glared at Yakyu. "You think I'm not above killing a little girl? Think again." Shiro yelled as he swung his blade up over his head, ready to bring it down on the 6-year-old. Suddenly Shiro felt a sharp pain in several spots on his back, followed by a sting running across his neck. The pain in his back was due to several chakra arrows deeply embedded in his back, and the sting on his neck was due to Soifun who had just slit his throat with her sword. Shiro grasped his throat in and began wheezing. At this point Yoruichi came to, just in time to see Shiro fall to the ground dead. The Werkat looked down at the body, tears forming for her old friend, as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Shiro." Yoruichi wiped the tears that threatened to fall, then looked over at Naruto, who was currently being blocked by Yakyu. Yoruichi walked over to him and looked him over to make sure his injuries weren't serious. They weren't, though he seemed to have a broken leg and a sprained ankle. "Well, it looks like you won't be walking for a while," Yoruichi said as she picked the blonde up bridal style, along with Yakyu, who refused to let Naruto go, much to his embarrassment. Yoruichi plopped him in the cart full of scrolls and said, "Looks like you're going to get a free ride back to Konoha. Enjoy it because it's the last time it's going to happen." The workcat then took one of the scrolls from the cart and sealed Shiro's body into it. Yoruichi gave a heavy sigh of grief, but then turned to her team and smiled like she normally did as she said, "Let's get going. Uryu, you're pulling the cart." The archer slowly turned to glare at Naruto, his glasses fogging up from his anger. Uryu walked up close to Naruto and whispered in his ear, "I'm going to pull this already heavy cart, with you in it. This means it's even heavier now. And I'll have to do it, all the way back to Konohagakure. I will get you for this." Naruto stiffened a little as he laughed nervously, causing Yakyu to ask, "What's wrong, Whiskers?" Naruto just patted her head as he stared into space and replied, "Nothing right now. Might be some problems later, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Suddenly, Naruto heard a voice grumbling something about being punched. Naruto turned and saw Kenpachi Zaraki slowly getting up. "Run. Go now if you want to live," Naruto yelled, startling everyone who just stared at him like he was crazy. "Just do it," Naruto yelled as they finally decided to do what he asked, though not sure why. And with that, Team 7 headed home. Team 7 entered the Hokage's office, with Naruto limping on a crutch and his left arm in a sling. "The mission was a success, Lord Hokage, and we have the body of Shiro Kurosaki," Yoruichi said in a stiff manner. The old Kage sighed as he said, "Oh, Shiro." Yoruichi handed over the scroll, as Hiruzen called for an Anbu to take it. The Hokage then noticed the little girl dangling on Naruto's shoulder. "Who's this?" Hiruzen asked. "This is Yakyu. She's an orphan we found when we were attacked by some ninja from Otogakure. She's become quite attached with Naruto," Yoruichi said as Hiruzen chuckled at the little girl. "I'll notify the orphanage to prepare a bed for her, and get her some new clothes," the Hokage said as he took out a form and began to fill it, but Naruto suddenly said, "Actually, I'd like to adopt her." This caused everyone to nearly fall over when this came from Naruto's mouth. "Are you sure, Naruto? Raising a child is a huge responsibility, and you're pretty young yourself," the Hokage said, trying to reason with the blonde. "I know, but I can tell you right now that she won't go without a fight. Right, Yakyu?" Naruto said as he looked at Yakyu, who replied, "Nope." Hiruzen chuckled as he put the form he was filling out and pulled out a different one. "You always accomplish what you set your mind to, Naruto, so this shouldn't be any different," Hiruzen said as he handed the form to Naruto. "Just fill this out and you'll have yourself a daughter," the old Kage said. Naruto immediately filled it out, and handed the form back to the old man, who gave his signature and said, "Well, welcome to Konohagakure, Yakyu Uzumaki," Hiruzen said as Yakyu giggled. The little pinkett then went silent as she looked at Naruto and said, "Does that mean you're my daddy now, Whiskers?" Naruto smiled and replied, "Believe it." Yakyu then began to squeeze Naruto's neck, cutting off his oxygen flow. "Yakyu, can't breath," Naruto said as he managed to pry the little girl's arms away from his throat. "Sorry, Whisker Daddy." It was a sunny day as Naruto Uzumaki relaxed in the park, his orange and white bucket hat over his face, as his daughter Yakyu played with the other kids. However, Naruto soon felt the sun's warmth being blocked by something too big to be Yakyu looming over him. Suddenly he felt the front of his shirt being grabbed and he was pulled off the ground. Naruto opened his eyes and saw none other than Sasuke Uchiha, Sharingan blazing, scowling at him. "Well, what can I do for you, Sasuke?" Naruto said in a good-natured tone with a smile, though he was actually highly aggravated at having his leisure time interrupted. "You've been avoiding me for weeks." The Uchiha all but barked out. Naruto put up a false thoughtful expression as he said, "No, I don't think I have." Sasuke growled and threw Naruto on the ground and said, "You will fight me." The Uchiha then heard the sound of Yakyu laughing and looked over at her on the swings. A dark smirk formed on his face as he said, "You fight me, or I'll just have to rough up that little brat of yours until you do." Suddenly Sasuke felt Naruto's fist slam into his face and he fell to the ground hard. He spat out a tooth as he looked up and saw a rage burning in Naruto's eyes that frightened him. "I'll fight you. Meet me training ground 7 in an hour," Naruto said coldly as he bent down and picked up his hat. "How do I know you'll show?" Sasuke said as he got up. Naruto put on his hat as he walked past the Uchiha and said, "Trust me, I don't wanna miss the look on your face when you lose." Sasuke merely scoffed as Naruto picked up Yakyu and left the park. Sasuke walked around the training ground searching for Naruto, his new katana at the ready. "You better show yourself. I've waited for this for a long time," Sasuke yelled out as he continued his search. Suddenly he heard a twig snap behind him, so he quickly swung his sword around at the perceived attacker. He was met with the sound of metal hitting metal, as he saw that it wasn't Naruto but a large man. He had a scar over his left eye while his right eye sported an eye patch, long hair spikes with bells on the ends, and a long battered sword which blocked Sasuke's own. The Uchiha retracted his sword as the man eyed him. "That's a nice-looking sword," the man said as a large, crazed smile formed on his face. The man raised his own sword and made a swipe at the Uchiha. Naruto was in his apartment, warming up 2 cups of instant ramen for himself and Yakyu, as a blood-curdling scream filled the entirety of Konohagakure. "What was that whisker, Daddy?" Yakyu asked as she sat at the small kitchen table, waiting for her food. Naruto sat the cup of ramen in front of her and simply replied, "I think Uncle Duck Butt just found a new playmate." Naruto was peacefully walking to the Hokage's office. He had a content smile on his face, a real smile, which was not a very common occurrence for him. He also felt as if his loneliness and slight bitterness was completely gone, and if the Zanpakuto wielder had to identify what brought this on, he could sum it up in one word. "Yakyu, will you stop yanking my hat down over my eyes?" Naruto said as his pink-haired daughter laughed. "But it's funny," Yakyu said, as her father adjusted his hat. The blonde swordsman then looked at the bright smile on his daughter's face, and gave a satisfied sigh. Yakyu had been his daughter now for over 3 months, and he couldn't picture his life without her. She had brought a brilliant light to his life and it made him love her even more than she would ever know. In all honesty, Naruto had little to no idea on how to raise a child, but so far just going with the flow seemed to be a smart move. "What does the old man want?" the little pinkett asked. "Dunno, but it's gotta important if he wanted me personally," Naruto said as they entered the Hokage Tower. They headed up to Sarutobi's office and, per usual, were met with a kindly smile from the old Kage. "Ah, glad you could get here so quickly, Naruto," the Hokage said as he continued to fill out his accursed paperwork. Naruto then took notice of a red-haired woman in a seat opposite Sarutobi. "So you're Naruto?" the woman asked as she got up, standing evenly with the boy. "Yep, he's my whisker daddy," Yakyu sounded off from Naruto's shoulder, smiling widely. The woman then began to glare at Naruto as she said, "Aren't you a little young to have a child?" Naruto gave his own glare, not at all caring for the woman's assumption. "She's my adopted daughter," the blonde said in an edgy tone. The woman's glare disappeared and said, "Oh, sorry, I guess I kinda jumped to conclusions, huh?" Naruto softened his gaze, though there was still a slight glare. The woman sounded like she was talking against Yakyu, and that was something Naruto would not stand for. Disregarding the woman, the blonde turned his attention toward Sarutobi and said, "So what did you want, old man?" Sarutobi looked up from his paperwork and said, "Ah, yes, I called you here because this woman has something she wants to tell you." Naruto turned back to the woman and said, "Well, go ahead." The woman said nothing, looking at the floor as if looking for words. Sensing her unease, Naruto said, "When I have something I need to tell someone, I just blurt it out." The woman nodded and shouted, "I'm Kushina Uzumaki and I'm your mother." Naruto stuck his pinky in his ear, making sure his eardrum wasn't busted, before saying, "I'm sorry, but could you repeat that?" Kushina took a deep breath and said in a soft tone, "I'm your mother." Naruto slowly nodded. There was an uncomfortable silence in the room. Well, at least for a total of 5 seconds before Yakyu all but shouted, "Hi Granny." Kushina, while she would have pounded anyone Essel for calling her that, smiled at her granddaughter. "Hi, what's your name?" the red-haired woman asked. "Her name is Yakyu," Naruto answered for Yakyu, in a cold yet civil manner. The blonde then turned to Sarutobi and said, "If you don't need me for a mission, then I'll be going." The old Kage didn't say anything as Naruto quickly left his office, leaving a very hurt Kushina. Naruto made his way to his team's usual training ground, eager to put what had happened in the Hokage's office out of his mind. He came up on Yoruichi sparring with both Soifin and Ryu at the same time, but they stopped when they saw Naruto come up. "So what did the Hokage want?" Soifin asked. Naruto was about to say that he just wanted to talk to him, but Yakyu shot that plan to hell when she blurted out. "Old man wanted Whisker Daddy to meet his mommy." Naruto face-palmed, really wishing that he had told her not to say anything to them. "I thought your mother was dead," Ryu said as he adjusted his glasses. "Join the club," Naruto said as he plucked Yakyu from his shoulder and drew Benihime. "All right, let's get started," the blonde said, ready to begin training, as his team each gave each other a look. Naruto, are you okay?" Yoruichi said as she placed her hand on Naruto's shoulder. "Never been better, why?" Naruto said, giving a false smile. Yoruichi could tell that he was greatly bothered by meeting his mother, but she didn't want to pry. After staying silent for a few moments, Yoruichi decided that he would benefit from getting his mind off it for a while. "All right, well, let's get to it," the workat said as she motioned for her team to attack her. After a couple of hours, Ryu and Soifin headed home, leaving Naruto, Yakyu, and Yoruichi. The workat looked over to her left and saw Yakyu playing with a grasshopper in the field, and decided that now was her chance. She walked up to Naruto, who was lounging with his hat over his face. "Naruto, can we talk?" The whiskered boy didn't move, but responded. "What about?" Yoruichi sighed and stayed silent for a few moments, looking for the right words. "I lost both of my parents when I was 7 years old." The dark-skinned woman started. Naruto sat silent, not moving a muscle as she continued. "That first year was a blur, but I remember that I never felt more alone." Yoruichi gave a sad sigh as she saw Naruto still not moving, and continued. "I would have gone crazy, and if it wasn't for Shiro I would have." At this point Naruto got up, dusting himself off and said, "That's a sad story, and I'm sorry, but do you want to get to the point?" Yoruichi looked him square in the eye and said, "Naruto, I think you should talk to your mother." And the blonde's immediate reply was, "No." Yoruichi gave him a soft look and said, "I understand how you feel." Naruto cut her off and snapped out, "No you don't. You understand what it's like to lose parents. I never had anyone." She left a baby all alone, without so much as an explanation. Yoruichi was stunned by Naruto's outburst, but she then said, "Naruto, you have a chance I would kill for, and you should at least let her explain. After that you can do whatever you want, just talk to her before she goes away." Naruto looked away, obviously thinking hard about this. Yoruichi grasped his chin and turned his head so she could look into his eyes as she said, "If you won't do it for you, then do it for all of us who wish we could." The blonde then replied, "I'll talk to her, but no promises on what I do after that." At this point Yakyu came running up, something clutched in her fist. "Whisker Daddy, look, I caught it." The pinkett then opened her hand and showed a smashed grasshopper in her hand. "I think you held it a little too tight, Yakyu," Naruto said as Yakyu wiped the squished bug from her hand. Naruto picked her up and put her on her preferred spot on his shoulder. Naruto then began to head to the Hokage Tower, causing his daughter to ask, "Ain't we going home?" Naruto shook his head and said, "We're going to talk to Granny." Naruto had gotten the address Kushina was now living at from Sarutobi's office. Naruto was now a little less friendly with the old man, even referring to him by his title instead of his usual term of endearment. On the way, the blonde dropped Yakyu off at Soifin's, not wanting her to hear what might end up being an adult argument. Naruto knocked on the door to the apartment, which oddly enough was only a block away from his own apartment. "Must have wanted to get close to me. Can't imagine why," the blonde Uzumaki thought bitterly as Kushina opened the door. "I'm glad you decided to come," the redhead said as Naruto entered. He took a seat in an armchair, putting Benihime on his lap. Kushina sat on the small couch opposite him. They both sat in silence, with Naruto not being the least bit interested in talking first. "So, where's Yakyu?" Kushina asked, finally breaking the awkward silence. "She's staying at one of my teammates. I didn't think she needed to be here in case things got ugly," Naruto said, his voice even, yet cold. Kushina shifted in her seat, very uncomfortable by the whole situation. "So, how long have you been a genin?" Kushina asked, trying to coax her son into actually talking. "Cut the crap. I came here for answers, not small talk. Why'd you leave?" Naruto said, eager to get it over with. "Straight to the point, huh? You get that from me," Kushina absent-mindedly said. "I didn't get anything from you," Naruto snapped, making Kushina jump a little. The whiskered boy got up, placing his zanpakuto on the coffee table and began to pace around the room. "My so-called childhood was a living hell. I had to put up with verbal abuse from the villagers, with the occasional physical, and I no idea why. I played the likable idiot act to try and get friends, and it worked to an extent, but everyone always took their kids away from me, thinking I was a demon," Naruto ranted, causing Kushina to tear up. The whiskered boy then turned to the older woman and shouted, "I want to know why I didn't have a mother. I want to know why I had to cry myself to sleep every night. I want to know why I went through all that hell by myself." Kushina couldn't stand it anymore and shouted back, "I couldn't stand to look at you." Naruto quickly grabbed Benihime and shouted, "Razor, Benihime," and sliced the couch Kushina was sitting on in half, missing her by only a few inches. The red-headed Uzumaki sat stunned as Naruto pointed the tip of his blade at her. "You better have a damn good reason for saying that to my face," the blonde Uzumaki said, his voice low yet shaking with rage. "Your father was Minato Namikaze." This completely threw Naruto for a loop and he lowered his blade. "We were in love, well, more like soulmates. I loved that man more than life itself. When I became pregnant with you, Minato decided to propose, but wanted to wait until you were born before getting married," Kushina said as Naruto had sat back down, but with his hand still on Benihime's hilt. "I was the former holder of the Kyuubi, and when I went into labor with you a masked man attacked and let the fox loose. Your father had no choice and had to give his life to seal it inside you, since my body couldn't take it being resealed into me." Kushina then gave a heavy, grief-filled sigh as she continued. "When I saw you, all I could see was Minato's face and that damned fox. I wanted to stay, I really did, but I just couldn't bear to look at you. It's taken me all these years to get over it, but looks like I did it a little too late." Naruto just sat, not saying a word with an unreadable expression on his face. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, I know I don't deserve it, and I know you must hate me, but I'd at least like to get to know you and maybe be your friend," the redhead said, tears in her eyes. Naruto got up, tucked his zanpakuto in the sash on his waist, and headed for the door. Before he reached the door, however, he stopped. "I don't hate you, but I'll never be able to forgive you. I'm willing to give you the chance to be in my life, but not as a mother, that ship sailed a long time ago," the whiskered swordsman said, his back to his mother. "You wanna try and be my friend? I'm fine with that, but you're going to have to work for it, and I mean work hard. The second you give me a reason to doubt you or mistrust you, there won't be a second chance. Right now though, stay away from me, I'll come to you when I'm ready to talk again," Naruto said as he then took his leave. When he stepped outside, he saw Yoruichi leaning on the staircase up to the apartment. "How'd it go?" Yoruichi asked, concern evident in her voice. Naruto sighed and said, "I didn't forgive her for leaving, but I'm willing to let her be my friend. Right now though, I just need some time to think about this." Yoruichi pulled him into a hug, something that took the blonde by surprise, as she said, "If you ever need to talk, I'm here." Naruto slowly returned the hug and said, "Thanks, Yoruichi." They parted and Naruto looked at the ground in silence. He didn't really want to be alone right now, so he said, "Wanna go with me to pick up Yakyu and maybe get some ramen?" The workat looked at him with a look of confusion, but got that it was his way of asking for some company. "Sure," the dark-skinned beauty said as they headed off to pick Yakyu up. "I want chocolate ramen," Yakyu yelled as she looked at the pictures on the menu. They don't make chocolate ramen Yakyu. Naruto said calmly as he ordered his usual 8 bowls of miso and beef ramen and 1 bowl of chicken ramen for the pinkett. Yoruichi ordered the same amount as Naruto, but in shrimp and fish. They both ate their food very quickly, and both were ready for another order. Pretty soon it seemed to passers-by that the two were in an eating contest, and needless to say there were bets made. However, both Naruto and Yoruichi were completely oblivious to this fact. When they were done, those who had made their bets were disappointed to find they both had eaten 28 bowls even. As they both walked out of the restaurant, they were met with simultaneous shouts of, "You cost me a fortune." The gamblers left in a bad mood at not gaining anything. Both ninja looked at each other in confusion as Yakyu asked, "What was that about, Whisker Daddy?" Naruto put Yakyu on his shoulder and said, "No idea, I'm telling you, Sasuke is just getting downright insane with trying to fight me." Everyone's favorite whiskered Zanpakuto Wielder said as he, Shihouin, and Ryu waited for their orders of ramen. Fair enough, but Naruto tried again, but was again cut off, this time by his female teammate who said, "And I think that Zaraki guy is still looking for him." Naruto then said, "That was well deserved." He threatened Yakyu. This shut up both of his teammates. Shihouin then noticed the lack of the little girl and asked, "Where is Yakyu?" The blonde simply replied, "Yoruichi wanted to watch her today. Said that girls need a woman's presence every now and again, or something." Getting back to the topic at hand, if you would just fight Sasuke once, I'm sure he would leave you alone. Ryu said as his food was placed in front of him. Naruto half-heartedly poked at his ramen as he thought, "You know what, I guess it couldn't hurt. Hell, I'll even let him win if it means that he'll back off." Naruto said as he began to down his ramen. After he finished eating, Naruto began to seek out his unwanted rival to put an end to this once and for all. He found Sasuke at the training grounds with his team, Sakura Haruno, his sensei Kakashi, and some guy that looked pretty similar to the Uchiha. I think his name's Sai, Naruto thought, but decided to focus on his mission. "Sasuke, I'm here to fight you," the blonde said, getting right to the point. Sasuke eyed him before saying, "What's the catch?" Naruto shook his head and said, "No catch, no prank, no nothing. Just you and me, right here and now." The Uchiha began to back away, a slightly crazed look in his eyes as he said, "No, you're up to something." At this point Kakashi said, "I think Naruto's serious." Sasuke jerked his head toward the silver-haired Jonin, as his girlfriend Sakura said, "I think you should just go ahead and beat him, Sasuke, I know you can do it no problem." The Uchiha's right eye began to twitch as he kept backing away and said, "You're all in on it." This caused everyone to just stare at him. "Sasuke, I promise you that I am not planning anything. Nothing is going to happen, I just want to fight you," Naruto said, a part of himself enjoying seeing the Uchiha crack. Everyone just kept staring at the raven-haired teen like he was nuts, making his eye twitch even more. "I'm not crazy, you're all crazy. Especially you, Sai," Sasuke yelled, pointing his finger wildly at everyone. "I just want to fight," the blonde said, not even wanting to fight now as he was just enjoying the show. "Well, too bad. No one's going to fight me ever again," Sasuke yelled as he ran into the forest, laughing like a madman. "Well, can't say I didn't try," Naruto said as he took his leave, leaving a very confused Team Kakashi. Sasuke made it to the middle of the forest before he stopped running. "That idiot, wanting to fight me. I showed him," the Uchiha boasted. After calming down and thinking for a few moments, Sasuke yelled, "Damn it, it was an average night in the Uzumaki household." The moon was high in the sky, as Naruto and Yakyu slept. Naruto on his bed in the living room, while Yakyu slept in the small room next to the bathroom. Naruto would have to find another apartment when Yakyu got older, but for now the small size of the room didn't bother her, she even thought it was cozy. It was so quiet in the apartment that you could hear a pin drop. "Daddy!" Yakyu suddenly shrieked from her room. Naruto quickly woke up, tumbling out of his bed, and quickly ran toward his daughter's room. He yanked the door open, turned on the light, and pulled her into a tight embrace as she began to sob. He pulled away and looked her over, making sure she wasn't hurt. Naruto saw the look of fear in her watery eyes and knew what had happened. Bad dream? Naruto asked as the little pinkett nodded. Naruto got off his knees and sat down on Yakiru's bed and pulled her into a hug. I was scared, Daddy. I was lost and you weren't there. Then I saw you, but this bad man grabbed you and took you away. Yakyu sobbed as Naruto rubbed circles on her small back, trying to calm her. I'll always be there for you, Yakyu. I might have to leave you alone sometimes, but I promise that I'll always come back. Naruto said as she slowly stopped crying. The young father then realized that this was the first time that Yakyu had called him Daddy, without having Whisker come before it. A smile of pure happiness graced his face. Can I sleep with you tonight? The little girl asked. Naruto picked her up and carried her to his bed. Naruto sighed contentedly as he began to fall asleep, happy to know that Yakyu was safe and secure. I love you, Daddy, Yakyu said as she snuggled next to him as she rapidly began to drift off to sleep. Naruto was surprised by this, as it was actually the first time Yakyu said that. He knew she loved him, she showed him every day how much she did, but this was the first time she had said it. Actually, she was the first person to say, I love you, to him, period. Naruto felt her slow breathing and knew she was asleep. I love you too, more than you'll ever know, Naruto said as he drifted off to the most peaceful night's sleep in his life. The next day Naruto headed towards his team's usual training ground, Yakyu on his shoulder as usual. It was odd that Yoruichi called them together on a Sunday, as it was their day off. I called you guys here today to tell you that I've recommended you for the Chunin exams, Yoruichi said as she handed them some forms. Fill these out and you'll be officially entered, the work cat said as she handed the forms out. Naruto, Soifun, and Aryu each took theirs as their sensei handed them each a pen. Now before you start to fill those out, you all have to agree to join or you can't enter. I also have to warn you that it isn't uncommon for people to die in these exams. In fact, if only one person is killed in the exams it's considered unusual, the dark-skinned Jonin said, causing her students to freeze for a few moments. Aryu and Soifun began to fill theirs out after a few moments of thought, confident that they could pass, but Naruto just stared at his blankly. He didn't know what to do. If this was him 3 months ago then he would have signed it no question, but he had other responsibilities now. I know you're scared of leaving Yakyu alone, but you can't let your fear stop you from doing this. With a promotion you could afford a bigger apartment and could provide better for her, Benihime said, trying to help her wielder make his decision. After a few minutes Naruto began to fill out his form, determined to become a Chunin for Yakyu's sake. When he was done he handed his back to Yoruichi. Now the exams are going to be held in Sunagakaure this year so we'll be out of the village for at least a month, the work cat said as she saw the look on Naruto's face, who looked over Yakyu who was attempting to climb a tree with very little success. Can you watch Yakyu while I'm gone? Naruto asked his sensei and best friend, already knowing he couldn't take her with him. I'll be going along with you, so no. There is someone you could ask, Yoruichi replied, causing Naruto's expression to darken. Naruto walked up to an apartment and knocked on the door. After a minute, it opened to reveal Kushina hadn't seen him since their talk a few weeks ago, so she was rightly surprised by his presence. I'm going to the Chunin exams in Suna, so I need you to watch Yakyu, Naruto said, still in the cold tone he had used to take to her with before. He handed her a bag and sat Yakyu down. Yakyu looked up at him and said, Daddy, can't I go with you? This was hard on Naruto, knowing she didn't want him to go. He hadn't been on a C-ranked mission since the one he found her on, so she wasn't used to him being gone. Naruto put on a happy face and said, You're gonna have fun with Granny, and I'll be back before you know it. Yakyu still didn't look convinced, so Naruto tried a different tactic and said, If you be a good girl I'll get you some chocolate ramen when I get back. At this Yakyu instantly glommed her father saying, Okay Daddy, I'll be good. I love you. Naruto laughed, told her goodbye and he loved her too as she ran into Kushina's apartment and began to investigate everything. Naruto looked the older Uzumaki in the eye and said, I'm trusting you with the most important thing in my life. If something happens to her, I won't hesitate to do whatever happened to her to you, only 1,000 times worse. Naruto then said one last goodbye to Yakyu and took his leave. Kushina sighed as she closed the door, and turned to see her granddaughter rummaging through her cabinets. "Where's the ramen?" the little girl asked, making Kushina laugh. She might not be an Uzumaki by blood, but she has our taste. Kushina thought as she began to prepare a meal for her granddaughter. Fast forward 1 month. Kushina and Yakyu waited at the main gate for Naruto. Yakyu had a good time with her grandmother, but she was more than ready for his father to come home. They saw the other teams from Konoha that had entered walk through, but no sign of Naruto. Soon there was no one else coming, causing Yakyu to begin tearing up. Kushina was about to bend down and comfort her, but she saw something running at top speed in the distance. In a flash, Naruto was in front of them hugging Yakyu. He wore a Konoha flak jacket, a clear sign he had passed, but Kushina saw that he was only hugging Yakyu with his right arm. She took a closer look at the other side of his body and saw that he was missing his left arm, looking like it had been cut in the middle of the bicep. Kushina bent down to their level and said, "What happened?" Naruto looked at her and said, "Sasuke Uchiha happened." Naruto did not go into further detail on what happened to his arm, and when Kushina asked what had happened again, he simply changed the subject. "Thanks for taking care of her, Kushina. I might let you do it again sometime," was all Naruto said to Kushina as he took Yakyu home. At this point Yoruichi, Soifun, and Aryu walked up to the gate. "What happened to Naruto's arm?" Kushina asked. "Sasuke Uchiha went rogue during the exams. Naruto tried to stop him and that bastard cut his arm off," Yoruichi said darkly as showed her ID guards. Kushina was about to ask about the specifics, until she saw a casket being carried through the gates with the Hokage's hat on top of it. Sasuke betrayed Konoha to join with Orochimaru. The old man was fighting with that snake bastard and sealed away his jutsu, but gave up his life to do it, Yoruichi said as she wiped a couple of tears from her golden eyes and headed into the village. Naruto looked at the interior his apartment, surprised to see it had been cleaned. He assumed Kushina must have done it while he was gone. He sat Yakyu down on the couch, a hard task to do with only one arm, and then sat down next to her with a tired sigh. "So how was Granny's?" the blonde asked in a cheerful tone, but Yakyu didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Naruto's arm, or lack thereof. "Daddy, where'd your arm go?" Yakyu asked in a quiet voice. Naruto looked down at her frightened eyes and put on the best smile he could muster on the moment. "I just had an accident, nothing to worry about," Naruto said as he patted Yakyu's head. The little girl laughed as Naruto then asked, "So were you a good girl for Granny?" The little pinkett nodded her head furiously as she said, "Yeah, Granny's really nice. She played games with me, and she read me stories, and she..." Quote. Naruto had stopped listening after a minute and just looked at his daughter. He had missed her a lot during the month he was away and worried about her every day. He was glad to hear that Kushina treated her well and that Yakyu had another person in her life to love her, but there was slight anger at Kushina. The way Yakyu described what she did for her while he was away made it sound like she would have been a great mother, provided she was around to be one. Naruto pushed those thoughts away and resumed listening to Yakyu list all the things she had done at Kushina's. "And she even showed me how to use chakra," the little pinkett finished. Naruto raised an eyebrow at Kushina teaching Yakyu about chakra, but laughed at her pronunciation and said, "I think you mean chakra, baby." Naruto then remembered the promise he made Yakyu and said, "Let's go see about getting some chocolate ramen." Yakyu beat him to the door, eager for what she thought would be the best meal of her life. It was 10 o'clock at night. Half-cleaned dishes with the remains of chocolate sauce and a couple of noodles sat in the sink. Yakyu slept peacefully in her room, her full stomach helping with that. Naruto on the other hand tossed and turned in his bed. He groaned and growled in his sleep, a clear sign he was having a nightmare. Naruto stared down the Uchiha and gripped the hilt of his Zanpakuto tightly. He saw the blood on Sasuke's sword and then noticed Sakura's body behind the Uchiha. "I've just attained a power far beyond what you can imagine and all I had to do was kill the person closest to me." Sasuke chuckled darkly, as Naruto glared from under the brim of his hat. "We might not have been on the same team, Sasuke. Hell, we weren't even friends, but I could tell she loved you," Naruto said with an edge in his voice. Sasuke merely scoffed and replied. Love. What good is love when I can have power? Naruto simply shook his head. It was clear the Uchiha was a lost cause at this point. Naruto swung his sword and said, Scream, Benihime, and sent forth a red blast of energy. Sasuke dodged and charged forward with his sword, which was now covered with electricity. Naruto blocked with Benihime. Sasuke broke away and made several more slashes, which Naruto blocked easily. Sasuke quickly jumped back and did several hand signs before shouting, Fire style, Fireball Jutsu, and shot a large blast of flame from his mouth at the blonde swordsman. Scream, Benihime, Naruto yelled as a crimson shield blocked the flames. Shred, Benihime, the blonde yelled as he sent forth crimson blasts from his shield. Sasuke quickly used a substitution jutsu and avoided the assault. Guess it's time to start fighting seriously, the Uchiha said as he sheathed his sword. He did a couple of hand signs and shouted, Chidori, and charged at Naruto with a handful of lightning. Naruto moved out of the way, but Sasuke quickly unsheathed his sword and sliced Naruto's left arm off at the bicep. The blonde roared in pain as he kicked the Uchiha in the head. Naruto quickly stuck Benihime in a leftover fire from Sasuke's fireball and then stuck the hot metal on the stump of his arm to cauterize it. Sasuke got up and smirked at the blonde. Well, it looks like you're at a disadvantage, the traitorous Uchiha said with a smirk. Naruto glared, but gave a fox-like smile despite his pain, and said, I got one more trick up my sleeve. Naruto then twirled his sword with his hand, then suddenly stopped and shouted, Bankai, and an explosion of chakra erupted. Sasuke wondered what that was supposed to do as he tried to find Naruto inside the dust cloud. Suddenly a red streak shot out and grabbed the Uchiha. Whatever had grabbed him was extremely hot and burned his skin badly. He screamed in agony, but was then slammed into the ground. He looked up to see 9 blood-red fox tails that were covered with flaming red chakra. He traced the source of them to the hilt of Naruto's sword. He then saw Naruto himself, his eyes blood-red and slitted and his whisker marks were larger than before. Ready to die Sasuke, Naruto said, showing that he also now possessed fangs. Naruto sent forth one of the tails and smacked Sasuke across the left side of his face, giving him third-degree burns and severely damaging his left eye. However, before Naruto could do anything further, he was stabbed in the back by an unknown assailant. I can't have you kill Sasuke before I'm ready for him, Naruto heard someone whisper as he then passed out. Naruto shot up from his bed in a sweat, breathing heavily. Seeing that he was home he calmed down. He unconsciously felt the stump on his arm. He looked at the clock and saw that it was 5 o'clock in the morning. He sighed and got out of bed to prepare for the Hokage's funeral, which was in 3 hours. He would have gone back to sleep, but he knew he'd have the same nightmare again. Before he did anything else he looked in on Yakyu, seeing her small form asleep. He then saw the small sword Yakyu had used in his defense against Shiro Kurosaki on the wall on the opposite side of her bed. He knew it had to be a Zanpakuto, even though it seemed that she hadn't made a connection to it yet. I hope you never have to go through this Yakyu. I have a feeling you'll want to be a ninja, but I really hope I'm wrong, Naruto whispered as he then shut the door. The funeral was a sight to behold. Every ninja that was in Konoha at the time was there, which numbered in the hundreds, and the civilians numbered in the 100,000s. It was even raining, causing many to believe that the heavens themselves were in mourning. Eulogies were given, flowers placed next to a picture of the third, and tears were shed. Soon the only people left were Naruto, Yakyu, and Yoruichi. The Cat walked up to him and said, I'm sorry Naruto, I knew you two were really close. Naruto nodded and said, yeah, the man was like a grandfather to me for most of my life. I didn't trust him like I did when I found out he was keeping my mother being alive a secret, but now I understand he was just trying not to hurt me with the truth. Things stayed quiet for a few minutes, not even Yakyu said anything as she was too sad at the old man's passing. I know this might not be the right time, but I was wondering if you wanted to go get some ramen with me sometime. Alone, Naruto just looked at her curiously for a moment, before a ghost of a smile formed on his face. I'd like that. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.